Okay, so here we are again with the Helen Schumann stories, and we are continuing our journey, and we are going to talk today just about the things that you remember the most fondly about your siblings, because you have a slew of siblings. So what do you remember the most fondly about them?
Celia, being the eldest, took an awful lot of responsibility in helping my mother. And Mama always tried to make it up to her. And Celia was an enormous help. There's no question about that in doing everything that Mama asked. And I wasn't that good about it, doing what Mama asked. And I'm sorry, little Marlena, I'm sorry. Anyway, Celia was someone to look up to, and she carried that banner really well, especially in the academia aspect of it. And all of us kids henceforth were encouraged to have excellent grades, meaning A's, maybe a B. C, you're getting in trouble. D is not permitted. We don't even talk about F's. I don't think any of us ever had an F, any of us. But Celia was very astute, and all of her teachers liked her very much. I remember that. And she also was the first one to be Future Homemakers of America chapter president.
Wow.
And Venna followed, and then I did. And of course, Helen had to take it a little further. She was chapter president plus state FHA president. So anyway, I remember Celia working really hard with the family, and particularly with me when she could see that Mama was losing the argument with me. Celia would step in and try to get me to see the ills of my ways. And I can remember one thing. I was arguing with Mama about something I wanted, and Celia called me an evil, mean, selfish person. And that cut me to the core. That really hurt, and it still does. But it did shut me up, I'm quite sure, whatever that was about. And I remembered that forever. And I'm sure that that probably has something to do with me staying or trying to be a good girl for the rest of my life.
So it worked.
It worked. Absolutely,
yeah.
It worked. Yeah. And Celia, I don't believe she was in college anymore with that when Daddy died. Certainly, when Daddy's death, the whole family dynamic changed for everyone who was doing what. And she had been going to BYU, and of course was doing very well. And she had met a fellow who had come to Wells. We had a lot of young, either high school or college guys come to Wells. The high school boys came to work on the ranches during the summer. And there's one gentleman that Celia took a real shine to. His name was Frank Odd. And we all thought he was the cat's meow, as did Celia. And she really fell in love with him. And when Daddy died, I believe she was a sophomore. Don't count me on that, but I believe she was a sophomore. But because the finances dramatically changed, she stopped going to school and came to Salt Lake and worked. And I can't remember exactly what she did, but it had to be something secretarial, because that's all that was allowed in those days: secretary, nurse, or school teacher. That was all available to us, and thank heavens that has changed. So Celia came to Salt Lake, dated Frank, had all kinds of hopes of marrying him, and Frank was gun shy about getting married. And so Celia started dating a college fellow that she met, and he proposed to her and she married him. And we all were kind of sad about that because we were all voting for Frank, darn his hide. And he stayed close to the family in that he would write Mama a letter now and again. And we all kind of stayed in touch with Frank. So Celia is, let's see, she's, okay, 5.5 years older than I am. And that's quite a difference in growing up, especially when there are two others. And also, too, when she had such an important part in raising us kids from until she left for college. And at that point, I was still in grammar school. And so I was still a little snot-nosed kid in terms of being able to relate to her in adult terms. So when she got married, that relationship changed. She lived away from the ranch, and we didn't see her all that often from then on. So Celia was an important part of my life and still is, given that she's the eldest still. She holds a certain respect and appreciation, too. I want to be sure to say that because... But we did some mean things given on the ranch, and it was before television time. We found our own entertainment. And one of the things that we were so entertained by was Celia was so afraid of frogs. I don't even know how to say how afraid of frogs she was because she went berserk. We never had seen that before. And we couldn't imagine it. So we had to see that more often. And between the old house and the new house, there is a creek that came down. And there was a place in this creek that was kind of swampy, as far as swamp you can get in Nevada, but it was wet and a perfect environment for little tadpoles and to turn into frogs. And we would have to pass by this place when we went to the barns. And so we would hear the little croak, croak, and they were calling to us to do this little evil deed to see. We became quite creative in where to put these frogs. So Celia would see them. And I remember us trying to find another way because Mama would get after us. Oh, would she get after us for doing this? It was primarily Dallas and I, but Venna was no angel in this too. She helped on this little escapade. And so one time we put the frog in Celia's pocket in her pajamas. And gosh, that frog stayed in there for hours. He couldn't jump out. And Celia had her jammies hanging on the back of the door. And if the frog peeked out, he said, oh shit, I can't jump that far. Kill myself. I'll stay here. And so sure enough, bedtime came and Celia went upstairs and we were all anxiously waiting to hear this horrified scream. And it was the most frantic, oh, you just never heard a scream like that. And of course, Mama knew immediately what was that all about. We had to go get the frog because Celia was long disappeared from where that frog was. We would put it under her pillow and in her shoe and I think in her desk drawer. But we had to stop that because Mama made us sit down and can't we see the damage we're doing to our older sister and how mean and awful we were to do this? To my understanding, Celia still doesn't like frogs. Probably more so, actually. but she was someone to look up to. And in a way, and Celia, I'm a little sorry. I was a little jealous of you because Daddy and Mama were so proud of her. And she certainly established a precedence for all of us kids to follow. And I didn't know as a youngster if I could live up to her qualifications and abilities. She learned to play the piano, and she also had a pretty soprano voice, and was a pretty girl. And in fact, in those days, I looked an awful lot like her. And I remember real clearly she had her reception in Wells in the chapel that my father helped build. And I believe it was on her reception was on a Friday or a Saturday night. And I had to, and then they went off on their honeymoon. And we were in town on Sunday to go to church, of course. And I had to run and get something for the family. And the cashier said, "What are you doing here? Aren't you on your honeymoon?" And I was so startled. I went, "Honeymoon? Oh, you mean my sister?" Because people thought I looked so much like her. And I also wore her clothes too. So that could be another shifting. And so Celia, Mama always dressed her very nicely, and thank heavens because I got her clothes as they came down the family pile. Venna couldn't wear them very much because of her shape was quite a bit different than Celia's and mine at that point, though she could wear sweaters and things that stretched a little bit. So obviously you know what the difference was. Anyway, let's move on to Dallas. Buddy Dallas, we called him Buddy. And I can remember he had 3 sisters, and there weren't any boys. And when Mama got pregnant again with the twins, nobody knew she was having twins, but he could only think of her having a boy. He wanted a brother in the worst way. And I think we, in fact, picked out a boy's name and didn't have any girls' names, much less twin names. So when Mama finally had the twins, he was so disappointed. And in fact, the story goes I don't remember this, but from the family history, we got to go to the hospital to see Mama and the twins. And Dallas sidled up to Mama at the bedside. In fact, if I remember clearly, he had to be encouraged to go to her bedside because he was mad. He didn't want to talk to her. He thought that she had betrayed him. Not only did he not get a brother, he got 2 more sisters. But as those threesome got older, they became real buddies, especially after my father died. Dallas sort of took on the position, not sort of being the father figure for the twins. But because Dallas was the only boy, and because I loved the outdoors, I got to spend most of my growing up years with Dallas outside in the ranch, doing all kinds of things. And I remember when people came to the ranch to look at the registered herd that was for sale, or with horses, the horse trader would come around too with a truckload of horses to see if there was anything that caught my father's eye, or if we had a horse that Daddy didn't want at the ranch any longer. We would trade. And I can remember a horse trader coming, and there was a switch of horses somehow, and I was in the middle of them helping them make this exchange. And the horse trader mentioned to my father, and I was lucky enough to hear, like, "Man, she works just like a man," I was so proud. because I sort of did look like a boy, I have to admit. My mother kept my hair short because it was impossible to keep curled. It was so fine. It was thick, but it wouldn't even hold a bobby pin. The bobby pin would just fall out because it was so soft. So she used to put little pieces of toilet paper and wrap around my locks of hair and then put the bobby pin in. It would hold up then. But generally, I'd only get my hair curled when I was younger at on Sunday when we went to church. And so otherwise, my hair was straight, flying all around. And in fact, one of our neighbors called me Curly because my hair was always straight and flying around, and it was just as blonde can be. And me being outside, I was as brown as an Indian. So it was a little bit startling to see me. And not only that, but I was wearing Dallas's outgrown Levi's, because Levi's were not made for women then. And pants for girls were just thin cotton, pedal pushers and things like that. And certainly not strong, dependable Levi's that would withstand ranch life. So I was wearing his Levi's and his boots and his shirt and this coat and then this short blonde hair flying around wildly. Though I have to say, when people heard my voice, they recognized, oh, she's a girl. And so back to Dallas, there's two stories particularly that stand in my mind and his too. One is that given that we were always working together, one of our chores was after we fed the livestock in the barns and in the meadows close by, we would have to go down with the team of horses and the wagon to the hay yard and to the haystack and load up the hay wagon. And my job was to stay on the wagon and move the hay around as Dallas threw pitchforks full down. And the necessity of that was first to get more hay on the wagon, and two, so that it wouldn't topple over, it wouldn't get top heavy. And one early cold morning, we had gotten the load of hay where it needed to be, and Dallas always threw the pitchfork from the top of the haystack down onto the hay wagon. Well, the one morning specifically that I remember, he threw the pitchfork into my calf in my leg. Yeah, it kind of hurt, I have to say. And at first, you thought you were hit. So I looked down and, oh my gosh, there was blood and the pitchfork was hanging out of my leg. And I said to Dallas, the pitchfork hit my leg. Oh, Helen, that's not funny. I said, no, really. Oh, no. He wouldn't believe it until he jumped down from the haystack, and he was mortified. He said, what do I do? I said, pull the damn thing out. And he didn't want to do that, but he did. I mean, what else were we going to do? And if I remember correctly, we got out of the haystack and he closed the haystack gate and he raced the team of horses up to the house. And I don't think there was much hay left on the wagon because we were going so fast. And nothing really came of it, I think, because it bled quite profusely. And I don't even recall going to the doctor to have stitches in it. but I certainly remember the incident. It was shocking. I thought, oh shit, the devil's after me already. Not quite, but. And then another time that I remember really well was I somehow got a picture of my sweetheart Jan, and it was a picture when he was still in grammar school. And I don't quite know how he got that because he was homeschooled basically, but it was a younger picture. He was only maybe 12 or so. Oh, now that I think about it, I do remember he got it in Minden before they moved to their ranch. Anyway, his cousin gave it to me, and I'm not sure how Peggy got it, but she got it for me. And this was the days before Jan even knew I existed. Anyway, I got teased about from the family because they knew that I had a real liking towards Jan. And there was a fellow whose father had a ranch over the mountain in the valley called Star Valley. His name was Craig Dahl, and he had a real liking for me. And he was a Mormon boy, and so we did a lot of activities together. He was a year older than I, and his mother and father thought I was absolutely marrying material and perfect for Craig. And Craig was a nice boy, and he had he was quite talented. People thought he was a little sissy because he learned to sew because I sewed. And he would do things like he learned to play the piano because I was learning to play the piano. And so people thought of us as an item, you know. And of course, Jan came into the picture. And I kind of kept Craig, or I'm sorry, Craig, but I did keep Craig around when Jan wasn't. Anyway, I don't know what encouraged Dallas to do this or how he even thought of it. He must have been mad at me for some reason. I had put Jan's picture on the back of my closet door for safekeeping. And one day I was getting ready for school, and by damn, Jan had a mustache and donkey ears on his picture. And there was only one picture who could have, or one person who could have done that. Only one. And it was Dallas. I was so hurt. Oh, I was so hurt. And I went downstairs to tattletale on Dallas, and Mama laughed. She thought that was the funniest thing in the whole world. And so did the rest of the family. They thought that was so funny. And I was crushed to my heart was crushed. I mean, that was my most valuable piece of my life. And to look at it every morning and every night, it made my heart feel so good. Well, there had to be retaliation. He wasn't going to get away with this. So Dallas had worked in school. They called it shop. And Jim Hettinger was their shop leader or shop teacher. And they decided that they all wanted to go to Disneyland. In order to do that, they learned how and built a horse trailer. After it was finished, they sold it and had enough money for he and the boys in the shop class and Mr. Hettinger and his wife, who happened to be my sixth grade teacher, Kay Hettinger, went to Disneyland. And while they were in Disneyland, Dallas saw this top hat that looked much like Abe Lincoln's. And Dallas was so taken by that hat. He bought it with one of his silver dollars. And he was so proud of that hat. Oh, he was so proud of that hat. And the cute story is, while he was in Disneyland, the Hettinger couple would want to go off and do their thing, and they'd let the boys go do their thing because they weren't so interested in taking some of these rides. So when they said, let's meet at such and such place, and we'll find you because of Dallas's hat, because he was tall, and this hat was at least another foot tall. So there was no mistaking where the boys were. So I got that treasured hat, and I thought, well, I won't be too bad. I won't cut the brim off. I'll cut the very, very top off. So I did. And I had to be careful because he couldn't be in the house while I did this. And I didn't want the family to see me do this because they knew too how much he loved that hat. Oh, when he discovered what I did, the wrath of God came down upon me. Not only from Dallas, but the whole family. Oh, such wrath I'd never seen before. And Dallas's heart was broken, and I did feel badly, but damn, it was fair because he broke my heart. But then I started feeling really sad that I had done that. So I thought, well, I'll fix it. So I went down into my mother's darning basket and got some red darning thread. It had to be strong, so it had to be this darning thread. And it was red. And I sewed the top back on Dallas's hat. It wasn't quite the same. Have this red around the top. He didn't wear it that much afterwards. That's still one of his memories. But Dallas and I had a lot of fun together. Another memory of Dallas and I, we would get up way before school time to do the morning chores, and we'd have to hurry and wake up and jump into our chore clothes, which were usually ones that had holes in them and, weren't presentable to wear out in public. And of course, mine were Dallas's old clothes. So we'd dash into our clothes, dash off and do our morning chores. And in the wintertime, it would get so cold. It would get colder than a well digger's butt. Oh, it got cold. And one winter, the creek by where the herd was would freeze over. So they wouldn't have any water to drink. They couldn't get through that ice. And so one of our chores, Dallas and my chores, were to get the horses, saddle them, and ride down to where the herd was with an axe and chop a hole in the ice. Well, it got so cold that it would freeze over and we couldn't chop a hole anymore. So we had the brilliant idea of getting into the dynamite box and get a fuse, and of course some matches, and go down and blow a hole in that damn frozen ice. And it did. It blew a big hole. But we were really careful because we knew and saw what damage dynamite could do. And so we would still have to take an axe because we'd have to create a hole in the ice so dynamite could really do its job. So we got the hole chopped in and enough for the stick of dynamite. And then we put the dynamite in and the fuse, and we always had a long fuse, long enough for us to run like hell into the willows so we wouldn't get plummeted by the ice chunks, and they were big ice chunks. So we did this one morning, dug the hole, put the dynamite in it, lit the long fuse, run like hell into the willows, and by damn, here comes one of Daddy's herd cows. And she was pregnant, of course. And she came, and Dallas and she came up to the spot to drink water because the cattle knew that's where they were going to get the water. And Dallas and I were jumping up and down and screaming and hollering and flapping our hats and doing whatever we could to get that dang cow to get her butt away from there because she was going to be dead. Dynamite blew, and we were praying, oh, please don't go off. Please, dynamite, don't go off. Let us. Well, it did go off, but fortunately, just before it went off, she turned around and had gone maybe 10, 15 feet away from the dynamite hole, and it blew, and she got hit with some big chunks of ice, but she didn't get killed. Oh, we were so grateful. Dallas and I were shaking, and we looked at each other. Oh, we've been spared too. So from then on, we made sure the cattle were far away from the ice hole. It was more an asshole than an ice hole after that. But there were times too, a memory of, there were some meadows where the creeks didn't go through. And so we would have to move the cattle at least once a day to the creeks to get water. So again, we'd saddle up the horses. This is way before ATVs and motorcycles and all of those things. Only horses were used at the ranch. And so we'd get our horses and we'd gallop down and move the herd over to where the water was and let them drink. And it always took a while for them to get their fill. And then we'd move them back. And then we'd have that long ride back to the barns because we still had chores to do. And we needed to do this before it got dark. And this usually was in the fall because we had cut hay in the meadows for the winter feed. And so the sun went down really early. And so, but then we got bored just going down, coming back, going bored. So we got into the idea of seeing whose horse was the fastest. And so we would race. And of course, to the barns. And that's the worst thing you can do with a horse is to race towards the barn. And Dad noticed that's what we were doing. And we were chastised not to do that again. And we knew we weren't supposed to, but we didn't dare do it again because we knew the thickness and the heft of my father's hand on our fannies. But we found other ways to entertain ourselves when we took the horses. Dallas, usually, I have to give him credit, was the most creative. He would put a burr under a saddle blanket. And of course, when I got on the horse was most uncomfortable, and it would act up. And I would have a time trying to control the horse, not knowing what the hell was wrong with his horse. I finally figured out that something had to be under the saddle blanket, and there was that damn burr. And so that stopped. But I can't remember what else he would do. I think he would tie the reins up that I had to spend time to get undone, and I mean stuff like that. But I wasn't innocent in this either. I would get even with Dallas, though I can't remember what bad thing I did to get even with him. But I did. But Dallas and I worked hard. We really did. We worked our fannies off, and he needed some strength because of the work we did. And so I was long and lean and mean. I really got some strong muscles. I could lift those 120-pound bales really easily without a problem once we got those bales, which was way down the road. Bales became popular, and the way to save hay, your hay stayed fresh and longer, better longer. And Dallas was 3 years older than I. And so when he went off to college and after Daddy died, let's see, he was in school when Daddy died, if I remember right. He got a scholarship to play basketball at Utah State. We were real proud of him. And he was a handsome bugger, blonde and very Nordic looking and tall. He was a little bit bashful, and we were always encouraging him to take girls out on a date. And he liked a couple of girls. I remember Maureen Vine. He did take her to a dance. She was the principal's daughter. So he was pretty brave to ask her out. And then there was Clara Riggins. He thought she was pretty cute. He took her out. But he didn't take too many girls out. But I can't remember how he found Beth, his wife, and my dear sister-in-law, who's always been very kind to me. And I remember when Dallas first started dating her, she was working in Salt Lake. She was a farm girl from Idaho, southern Idaho. And so when he started dating her, and he would invite, things got pretty serious with him, she would go up to the farm and spend the weekend. Of course, it was very proper. But by then, I was working in Salt Lake too, so I would drive to where she was working. She was working as a cashier at kind of a general store called Grand Central, and I'd drive over to get her and wait till she cashed out, and we would drive up to the farm and spend the weekend, and then I would drive her back, and so we got to know each other pretty well. But she was a little bit shy of me too. She sort of knew I was the bad seed in the family. And so, but I treasured those times being with Beth, going up and down to the farm. And it wasn't all that often that we did that. But when I did go to the farm, she would go with me sometimes. So when Daddy died, Mama leased the ranch to our uncle who had the neighboring ranch. And Dallas worked for Uncle George to help Mama with the funds and also to take care of the ranch because the ranch couldn't be left alone. So Uncle George took on the ranch duties, etc., along with his ranch. And in fact, Mama, after 4 years, decided it was time to move out of Clover Valley and buy something close to Salt Lake City where she could go to the symphony and the ballet and the opera. And there was a ranch that came available where Celia's husband was living. And so Celia called Mama and told her, you need to come and see this ranch. It's one of the best in the valley. And so Mama did go up there and took a liking to the ranch, as did Dallas. He was the one who was going to. And the ranch's main income was a dairy. So Dallas learned how to be a dairyman along with Hereford cattle. You just could not have Hereford cattle. Well, that was synonymous with our name, Schumann Hereford Ranch. You had to have, and to this day, Dallas on his ranch raises Herefords, where his grandchildren and also nieces and nephews come to select their steers for the fairs. And they almost always place or get champion or reserve champion. So Dallas has kept the pride of the Schumann Herefords. And Dallas is a sweet boy, or man now, sweet man. And we have a fond affection for each other still. There's lots of other tales with Dallas and I, but we'll move on to Venna. Venna was next to me. She was also the closest in the family. There was only 18 months difference between us. And so Venna was different than the rest of us in that Celia and Dallas and I definitely took more after the Schumann side, but Mom Venna was definitely on Mama's side. Her hair was beautiful brown, brunette, had a little bit of red in it, if I remember clearly, and she had big brown eyes, and we were blonde and blue-eyed, and she was very buxom and had a beautiful hourglass shape. And Celia and I weren't so blessed, which was so important, especially in high school. I can remember sitting in high school. Venna was just a year ahead of me. And at lunch, we would sit in the hall and eat our lunch. And the boys would just oogle Venna as she would walk by, You could just see their tongues hanging out. And Venna had some crushes on some boys she dated, a lot, as you can imagine, but she knew the boys in high school thought she was pretty much a hot ticket, and she was a little embarrassed by that. And but because I was so tall, I could wear her clothes too. So the clothes that I'd wear, people would say, "Oh, I didn't know you could fit in Venna's clothes." Well, I can because I'm taller. I can take up the difference. And the same with Celia, only Celia's fit because we were built the same. And so people would say, "Oh, you look so cute in Celia's dress." And I got tired of hearing that, and also tired of not having my own clothes. So I was complaining to Daddy one day, and he said, "Well, learn to sew." Oh, okay. So I did. I learned to sew on the family's treadle machine. There was no electricity or electric sewing machines anywhere to be found in those days. And Venna was quite popular in school. She had girlfriends too that she'd invite to come out and stay with us at the ranch. And that's how we got to know our friends a little better. We'd invite them to come spend the night with us, school night, and they'd come on the bus with us to the ranch and spend the night with us and get back on the bus and go back to school the next morning. And that was always fun. We always enjoyed that. But that was quite a process. We'd have to get permission from Mama and then ask our friend. But my mother would have to write a note to their mother. And so it would take at least a week before we could have this main event happen because of the procedures that were definitely the right protocol. But Mama was generous in letting us bring friends, but heavens, what's another mouth? With 8 children and always either her family or my dad's family there and hired hands. And so another mouth was just another potato. What the heck, And so when Venna graduated, she went to Salt Lake and lived with Celia, and she became a secretary too. That was still the thing to do. And after Venna came the twins, and there was almost 4 years difference between the twins and I. And so there had been a gap in babies since me. And so I was the baby for a little while, and I'm sure I enjoyed that luxury. So when the twins came, I was not forgotten, but just people didn't have time for me anymore. I mean, the ranch, Mama was busting Fanny just to do what she could with 4 kids, and none of the modern conveniences and all these people to take care of. Bless her heart, how she did that. And a little German girl who didn't know how to cook when she came. And did I mention the recipe that she exchanged grape nuts? You're right. She turned out to be a wonderful cook. Uh, Wonderful. Nothing was ever turned away, and there was very seldom any leftovers. Which was okay by us because the refrigerator wasn't all that big, and so there wasn't much room for leftovers. Mm-hmm. But there was always fresh milk and cream and bottled fruit in the pantry and freshly baked bread, and so we never starved. Usually there was cookies or a cake too, so Mama took good care of her kidlings, that's for sure. And so the twins were a novelty, absolutely a novelty, because there weren't that many people in Elko County yet. So I so remember Mama dressing them alike, and she made their clothes too, bless her heart, 2 of one thing. And the twins always looked darling, but they would get car sick. And in those days, the road to Wells was unpaved. It was a gravel road, and the cars would get dusty inside. And they got the honor of sitting in the front seat with Mama, but we wouldn't get very far, and both of them would upchuck. And then the smell of upchuck in the car, all of us kids were going, you know, because it was such a, and Mama, bless her heart, would have to take 2 outfits to change the girls in. Oh, and to this day, they can't ride in the back seat. But I was proud, you know, people always made such a big thing about how darling these identical twins were. And there's a story that goes, we were still living in the old house when the twins came, and Mama's and Daddy's bedroom was downstairs, and all of us kids were camped upstairs, the 4 of us. Oh, I remember having to go to the bathroom and going downstairs. In this old house, there were no lights in the hall or down the stairs, and I'd have to feel my way down those steps. And this house would creak and groan when the wind was blowing. And I used to have terrible nightmares, and I would wet my bed because I couldn't dare go downstairs. There were these scary things there. But when I did wake up and was brave enough to go down those cold steps, I would. But unfortunately, in the wintertime, Mama changed my bed an awful lot. I'm sorry, Mama, I'm sorry. But anyway, back to the twins. When they were born, I was 3 3/4 years old, and the twins had 2 cribs in Mama and Daddy's bedroom. And Mama and Daddy were having guests visiting, and the twins were sleeping. And one of them woke up and started fussing. And so I didn't want Mama to have to get up and attend to the baby. So I must have thought, well, I'll go help Mama. And so I went to Mama's bedroom and climbed up over the crib. Mind you, I'm maybe 4 now at the most. And these were big cribs. And they're nothing like how they are like how they are now, actually, wood and all of this. And so I found my way up. I climbed up over and got the baby and put it on my shoulder and held it with one hand so it wouldn't fall, and climbed back up over and down.
Oops.
And went into the living room, and oh my gosh, the visitors and Daddy and Mama all let out a shriek because there's this brand new beautiful little baby and a 4-year-old carrying it, and they immediately realized, how the hell did she get that baby? And they all dashed to get the baby, and I was, well, I got her to help you, you know. I remember that clearly too, but I did scare him really badly. Consequently, I never went to get a baby again, but I did run and say, babies are crying, you know. And so I remember the twins playing in the playpen, it being wood again, and bringing them toys if they got bored, but they didn't get much bored. They really not only played with the toys really cute, they really entertained each other. It was really cute to watch. And they also had, they would communicate with each other in their own little language. It was darling to watch. And I was really proud because people made such a fuss of them, you know, and they were darling. There's no question about it. And they were darling all the way growing up, through school, through college, and still darling. Even as older women now, gosh, let's see, they're 60.
Are they still close?
Yes, very close. In fact, right now, Kathy's living with Karen because of the separation of she and her husband after, gosh, nearly 40 years of marriage. That's a sad story. But yeah, and they could still, even though each of them married and lived in separate parts, Karen knew when Kathy's baby son was coming. Both of them adopted. And she called Kathy and said, your son is on his way, and his name is Adam.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Weird stuff like that.
Twin stuff.
Twin stuff.
Unique twin stuff.
Yep. And they still do it. They'll finish sentences for each other and know what the other is thinking. And it's amazing to watch. It really is. Though, you know, we just take it for granted. We're used to it, but other people are astounded. And it is pretty amazing still that they do that. And their tastes are very similar. And their actions and movements are still very similar. And yeah, they're extremely close. Have been their whole lives. So their poor husbands, though, living through that, you know, but they did. They are. Yeah, and the twins were smart girls too, and very popular, to say the least. And they had fun because, as an example, they would go on dates and they would switch dates. And their dates didn't know for sure that they were going with the girl they invited. They had a lot of fun with that. And the girls loved to dance. They would turn the music on and dance in the kitchen. And it was fun to watch them to do that. And they, in high school, they were still in grammar school when we moved to Utah. I remember driving the family car during that move to the ranch in Utah. And the twins were in the back seat and Reed was in the front seat. And an ironing board was between us all. I remember that we were driving in the green Biscayne Chevrolet, which was standard shift. And that was really an unhappy trip. None of us wanted to leave the ranch, and my father was buried in Clover Valley, and all of our memories and happy times were at the ranch in Clover Valley. all of our friends, and it was a tough, tough drive.
Mhm.
I remember getting in the car and driving through those tall, old poplar trees, which we had to do. It was like through the driveway at the ranch, and drove down a mile or two and thought, wait a minute, I need a souvenir. So, as a remembrance of the ranch. And so I flipped the car in reverse and backed up to the ranch, ran up to the front door, and on the front door there was a screen door. And the screen door had a copy of the Schumann brand. And I ripped it off the screen door, and I still have it. It's in my den. And I look at it quite often because it reminds me of the times that we would brand our cattle. And we didn't brand too many because we would only brand the cattle that Daddy didn't seem fit to sell as registered herd. And either they had what they called the line back, which meant their white went all along their back, or they were too big boned or something. So we would use them as the ranch meat, or sell them for other people to use for their meat. Or they didn't care if they ever had white down its back, So, and that didn't happen all that often. We didn't get many linebacks. So I diverted. Where are we?
Probably down. Any more stories with the twins?
Okay, the twins. Well, they were very popular, and they never had trouble getting dates, and they had lots of friends. And when they were growing up in Peoria or Camas, they went to school in Camas. They became cheerleaders, and they were smart girls too, and kept up with the family, getting good grades. And then they went to BYU to school. And I had, in the interim, started dating a boy who was from Peoria. And Karen had taken a real liking to this boy. And I would go on a date with this boy, and Karen would really warn me to be a good girl with that boy. And I was still dating Jan. And so I would go on dates while Jan wasn't in town. And well, this guy was no comparison to my Jan. I just did it as entertainment, cheap entertainment. They paid the bill. That's terrible. That's the truth. So Dawn started dating Karen as soon as she got to college, and they got married. They eventually got married. And as a side note, I sewed all of my sister's bridesmaids' dresses. Yeah, that's a nice memory to do. Anyway, Karen got married, and Kathy was not too far behind her. She and Mama were shopping in Sears, and her future husband saw this darling, blonde, cute girl, and he had the chutzpah to go up to her and talk to her. And then Kathy thought he was pretty cute too. So he asked for her phone number, and they started dating. He was going to school at the U, and Kathy, at that point, was going up to Utah State. I don't quite remember why I think because for the finances. She went up there to live with our grandpa Schumann. And then she started dating Buster. His name was Richard Cahoon, but his dad called him Buster, and everyone else did too. So we did too. We knew him as Buster. And then it got pretty serious, and there was a semester break, and Kathy thought she had saved Buster the trip of going up to Logan and back. So I had an apartment here in Salt Lake, and she came to live with me, and she and Buster would go out. And I can remember one time Jan came in to visit me, and the family was really getting after Jan to marry me. I mean, Helen was already in her 20s. I mean, she was getting to be an old maid. And clearly, Jan liked her. Why the hell didn't he ask her to marry him? And Kathy got on Jan one evening about that. And they got into quite a row. I'll never forget that. Jan held his ground. He did. And Kathy, she was not to be quieted or silenced. She wanted him to ask me now and then. No, Jan wasn't to be pushed or rushed. Anyway, bless her heart for standing up for me. You know, he could be imposing, and she was too. When she got her quills out, you didn't argue with her. It's still that way. It was always that way. Kathy was always the little bit of the stronger one in terms of being heard. And Karen, bless her heart, she could let you know how she felt. With me, at least, she was a little bit more understanding or sympathetic or more broad-minded than Kathy. Not to take anything away from Kathy. It's just that Kathy wasn't always in approval with the things that I did.
You rebel, you.
I was a rebel, for sure. Look, Jan wasn't LDS, and that was just unheard of, that I should marry outside of the church. And that was one of the reasons why actually Jan and I didn't get married, because it was so difficult for me. And every time the family knew I was going out with him, it was a fuss and difficult, very difficult for me. And Jan knew that I was going through that, and he was really sorry about that. And he used to come to church meetings with me to see if it would help.
And he wouldn't convert.
He would not convert, absolutely not. Mm-hmm. But he would come to Mutual every Tuesday night, and he would sit through the lessons. And one of his best friends was also an LDS boy, DeMardal, but he was not to be moved. But Jan, in high school, read all these philosophy books. I mean, good heavens, he was just a snot-nosed teenager, but he was into philosophy. And in fact, it was interesting, the principal, Mr. Harper, would pull him out of class to have these philosophical discussions. Yeah, and so when I would argue with Jan, but Jan, you know, because I was still a little devoted Mormon girl and believed in it until Daddy was killed. And I couldn't lift that car. And that's what shook my faith to the core. Anyway, so.
Anything more on the twins, or should we go on to Reed?
Let's go on to Reed. Okay. Oh, no, Rolf is next.
Rolf is next, sorry.
Rolf is next. Okay, there was 4 years difference between Rolf and the twins, because Mom, I'm sure, had told Daddy that's enough. She had a real difficult delivery with the twins. And the doctors didn't know she was having twins, but Mama kept saying to the doctors, I'm feeling too many feet. No, that's just an elbow, or that's just a knee or something. Mama, but no, she was not having twins. Well, the problem was she was in labor for like 7 days.
Oh my goodness.
Something like that. Yeah. And wow. if I get this story straight, and forgive me guys if I don't, but it seems like her personal doctor, Dr. Moran, was at some medical beat, and the other doctor, Dr. Collette, was not proficient in delivering babies. And when the babies weren't coming, he was worried about that and kept praying that Dr. Morgan would show up. And both of the babies were in the birth canal trying to come down. And when Dr. Moran got there, he immediately did a cesarean section, and here came the babies. And I think Kathryn was the first, because she always, whoever came first always would lord it over the second one because she came first and she was the oldest.
Well, in a C-section back then, that would have been a hard.
It was.
That was a hard. In 7 days, it's a miracle those babies survived.
Exactly, and they were born in when's your birthday, girls? In October, and we had an early hard winter, and they were in the hospital mostly because of Mama having been in, and the anesthesia was terrible then.
Back then,
yeah. And yeah, I remember going to the hospital and seeing all of these tubes coming out of her for drainage and stuff. Yeah, she had a tough time. And we got snowed in, and Daddy had to take the Caterpillar and the car, but chain the car to the back of the Caterpillar to meet Mother and the twins and some neighbor who was willing to drive her to the base of the ranch where the highway comes through. And he drugged the car to have something warm for them to come back up on. And so the Caterpillar and Mommy in the car with the babies got up to the ranch finally. And it was cold in that house. And so the babies were always bundled up and close by the heater. That was the only warmth we had in the house, was this, it was an oil heater. I don't know if it was kerosene. It must have been kerosene oil. And their playpen was always by the heater. And we had to be careful so that they wouldn't touch it and stuff. And they were the safest in the playpen, clearly. Mm-hmm. They didn't seem to complain much about that because they entertained each other. Cute little girls. And
so Rolf was 4 years later.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I was still spending time with the twins. Old house. I remember one thing though with the twins, I have to say. When we moved to the new house, or the big house, I can remember Mama asking me to get the twins and put them in the high chair and feed them a dish of peaches. So I can remember chasing them and putting them in the high chair, and they were crying, and I was hurrying as fast as I could with peaches to feed them. And we all took turns getting them ready for bed and things like that too. So Rolf came along 4 years later, and of course Dallas was all excited for a little brother. Please, Mama, let this be a little brother, please. And I remember going to town in the car, and we were always discussing what should we name the baby. And we had all kinds of names, and we were all pretty much in agreement that his name should be Rolf. And Dallas had Opa's name, and so we thought that maybe we should name Rolf one of Daddy's names. And he got Hiram, Rolf Hiram. And Daddy and Rolf were a pair. Rolf loved the livestock. He just loved it out. And he would go out with Daddy just as a little whippersnapper, you know, still in his snowsuit and go out and help Daddy with the cattle. And he memorized the cattle's names, even though they were registered. He knew which was Daddy's favorite. And that's pretty amazing because we had like 250 herd cows, mother herd, plus all these other ancillary heifers and steers and it all, and horses. But he was more in with the cattle than so much the horses. I don't remember Rolf too much on the horses, though I'm sure he was, because you had a ride to be in a ranch. And Rolf was a cute little bugger. And Venna and I were old enough to watch Rolf. The twins were too young to be of any assistance. So Venna took it upon herself to be Rolf's caretaker mostly. And she would take Rolf in this old baby buggy we had. It was a wicker baby buggy. And I think Mama had painted it white to make it look a little better. And she had put a lining in it. Mama did. It sewed a lining in it. And Venna would take Rolf for a buggy ride all the time. Every afternoon while the weather was good, she'd do that. And then as Rolf got a little older, like a toddler, she'd put him on her hip and take him for a walk. And she loved, I think we called it the diversion or conversion. Anyway, there was one of these creeks that came off the mountain, and we divided it, and it was at this diversion conversion place that Venna would walk Rolf up to on her hip, and it was quite a little bit of a journey, and it was through the meadows and the willows and whatever else, and the animals would be there, and deer and coyotes and rabbits and all kinds of animals would come through there. And it was a magical place because there was always water rushing, and it was like a little bit of a waterfall where it would go, and depending on which creek you would turn to dam it up to go to which creek and all. And so there was more vegetation around it because the water would foam up with it spilling over, and it was a great place. And just a little quick side note, I loved it too. And I had a habit of falling asleep when I got tired. I would just find a soft little place and make a little nest for myself and go to sleep. Well, I guess I decided to go up to the conversion, whatever, one day and was tired and built myself a little nest and fell asleep. And I woke up and there was a doe and a fawn eating right beside me. And it was so magical. I often thought that there were little fairies around there, little gnomes, or there was special. It was such a special place. And I didn't move. I even held my breath at times so they wouldn't move. And finally, I had to move. My bones weren't allowing me on that hard ground to not move anymore. And of course, they dashed off then. And Venna felt it to be a magical place too. And so Rolf and Venna were a pair until Venna moved to Salt Lake to come to work. And Rolf was the one who found Daddy under the car. And as you can imagine, that was awfully hard for Rolf. I was 16, so there's 8 years between us. So he was just 8 years old when he found Daddy. And I can remember so well this blonde, handsome little boy coming into the kitchen and saying, "Mommy, Daddy's dead under the car." And he spent so much of his time with Daddy, and Daddy was so happy to have him out there, his little helper. And especially since Rolf knew the cattle so well, and Rolf kept that interest up. He went to, oh golly, was it BYU or Utah State? He had affiliation both of those universities, and I'll just blame it on the morphine. I can't remember exactly. But either way, both schools had livestock departments. And Rolf, of course, affiliated himself with those departments. And of course, when they moved up to Peowa, Rolf joined the 4-H and had a steer in their fair. And so did Reed. But Rolf, and he was a little excellent showman because he was so good with the animals and almost always walked away with either a showman trophy or reserve or champion of the steer. And he carried that through the rest of his life. He, in college, took whatever classes there were with animal husbandry and whatever else. And then he went on a mission to Louisiana, I believe. But Rolf had an extra vertebrae in his back. He had a really long back, and Daddy used to be so proud of that. But we didn't know then that he had an extra vertebrae. And Daddy used to hold Rolf in his arms and lift up Rolf's shirt and say, "Look at that boy's back." Mama would say, "Oh, Hiram." Rolf loved the outdoors too, clearly, and he was a real help up at the farm. Dallas needed help, and so he used the boys. They hired, if I remember correctly, a neighborhood boy to help too. It was a big affair. Dallas had livestock besides the cows, and I think he milked somewhere between 50 and 75 head. And as a dairyman, you milked morning and night, and there was no forgiving. You couldn't just say, "We'll do it in the morning." No way. You had to milk those cows. So bless Dallas's heart, he was tied to the farm, and that's why Beth would come up. And so when they moved to Peowa, Rolf took on wrestling, and he did well in that. I don't know. I think he went to state competition. I don't remember if he won any of the state awards. And he also played basketball, of course. I don't recall him playing football because I think that got in the way of the ranch. Oh, I'm not sure again. I can't remember that for sure. And Rolf got married to Kathy and became a herdsman. And for several different ranches. They lived in Gunnison for a while, and that's where their first daughter was born. And then I recall he went up to a place in southern Idaho called Malta and was a herdsman for that ranch too. And I think he had the other two children there, who would be Rachel and Matthew. And he was there for a while and then moved to California with his family to be a herdsman for another rancher. And that's kind of basically all what he did. But then he and Kathy got divorced, and we were all sad about that because Kathy was a good girl. And but I was the first one to get divorced. Rolf was the second, so he had an easier time of it.
You broke the ice.
Of course, broke the ice. And Rolf was also the apple of Mama's eye. He was the golden boy for the family. And Rolf had extra problems with his back because of that extra vertebrae. And he was released from his mission early because of that back problem, and he suffered it for the rest of his life. With it, he had to be careful when he lifted. I can't remember if he ever had any surgery. Sorry, Rolf, I was involved with something else. So he had 3 children, and then later in his life, he gained all kinds of weight. And Rolf was a big guy. He was like 6'4" or 6'5", and he gained weight like he had to almost walk sideways to come through a door. So he was a force to be had. I mean, I can remember him walking through the front door and me gasping because he occupied so much space. And one thing about Rolf, and Reed took this up too, they could remember every joke in the world. He could go on and on for hours on at a time, telling different jokes. And they were mostly off color, I have to say. Unfortunately, we lost Rolf a couple of years ago because of his diabetes. But he was a stinker. He had a really hard time following the diabetic diet. And he had a thing with Coke. He was really addicted to Coke. He drank it by the gallons every day, and chocolate and candy bars, things that he shouldn't have. And he was single too most of that time. Though he had married twice after Kathy, but one was a nurse, and she tried her best to get Rolf to behave himself with the food intake. And that lasted, I think, for maybe about 4 years or so. I didn't know her all that well. And then he married another gal. And this gal was interesting because she saw Rolf at one of the cattle shows, because Rolf always took cattle from whatever ranch he was working at to these cattle shows, because that was wonderful advertisement for people who were in the cattle business. There were buyers always through these cattle shows. So Rolf would raise whatever animal he thought would best show and would take him to. So this third wife saw Rolf and thought he was a fine specimen of a man. And she envisioned herself, I can't remember her name, I can see her face, but she had 4 or 5 children. And she saw herself as a rancher's wife. She just thought that would be the most romantic life to live. And so she courted Rolf, and Rolf was quite taken aback by that. And they got married. And I remember her asking me to wear my strand of pearls. And I had a dickens of a time getting those back, actually. They didn't stay married very long. And she asked for an annulment right after their honeymoon. And that was really tough on Rolf. I think she found out that Rolf wasn't the cowboy she was dreaming of. Yeah. That was hard on Rolf. That was really hard. He he went down from then on. He definitely didn't take care of himself and had a hard time. And Rolf was quite a horse trader in the most renegade way.
Renegade way.
He would trade cattle and not quite ever make it just right, But people would call Rolf to have him select. When I say people, ranchers would call Rolf to have him come and select whatever animal their child should dress out for the fair. All over. I mean, in every state, Rolf would go. And also they would hire him to come and ask him how should they improve their herd, and who should they go to find this specimen of animal to improve their herd. And Rolf knew so many ranchers. He knew every rancher there was in surrounding states, and certainly in Utah. And he was called upon to judge at these cattle shows and was very respected. And in fact, in Logan, when they have their cattle show, they have a trophy, and it's a revolving trophy under Rolf's name. And every cattle show they have now, before the judging starts, they have a moment of silence for Rolf, which is nice. He knew cattle like nobody else. That's true. That is true. And he was born with that livestock gene for sure. And it's too bad that he had an unhappy married life, and his children were a bit estranged from him as he got older, and that's a shame too. And he sort of did all of his siblings bad in a way, with money and whatever. And for me, as an example, I bought their tickets to, I think it was Cancun, Mexico, and also made arrangements and put the down payment for their hotel and stuff. And it was almost 2 years before he paid me back, and I needed that money, and it was over $2,000. And I shudder to think how he got it, but I won't go there. I got the money, thank you, Rolf. But I called him almost on every month. Rolf, you promised, Rolf. And he would. He says, I will get it to you, Helen, in 2 weeks. 2 weeks would go by, no Rolf, and so he had his struggles, that's for sure. But he stayed active in the Mormon church, and had his funeral there in the Mormon church, and people at his funeral were very complimentary of him and talked about his good side. And he had his good side. He was very sensitive and sweet and smart. He was a smart, sometimes too much smart, not to his better. He didn't use that to the best of his abilities, but everyone liked him nonetheless and would forgive him for his sneaky ways. Love you, Rolf. He was the cutest little boy, though. He really was a happy little boy bouncing around. And so was Reed. And when Reed came, I think that's all for Rolf right now that I can talk about. So, and Dallas was so happy. He had a brother finally. Daddy always wanted 8 kids, and Mama was happy with 4. And I think that's why there was a division of me and the twins.
Right.
Well, darn, Mom got pregnant again, and not only did she have a baby, she had twins. But then she made it up with Dallas and had another little boy, Reed. And both Rolf and Reed were cesarean too. Still tough. In those days.
Wow.
Yeah. Mama, bless her heart.
Right.
I mean,
There's a strong woman. That is a strong woman.
That's right. That German gene, for sure.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. And Mama wasn't very tall. I think she was only 4.5, 5'5". I was taller than she was in 5th grade. That's why the bent fly swatter didn't work so well. Anyway, she got pregnant with Reed 4 years later after Rolf. And I can remember being in the green Pontiac, deciding what Reed's name should be. And for some reason, his middle name needed to be Jan. And for the life of me, I didn't think I knew Jan then, because I was only in 5th grade, and he was being homeschooled clear up in the border of Idaho, Nevada. But Jan, his name had to be Jan. And that also was the middle name of Mother's youngest brother, who died of leukemia during the war. That was a terrible thing for the family to experience. And they tried everything to keep, his name was Garrett. And of course, there was nothing available for him. Anyway, Jan Schumann came around. Darling little boy. Oh, he was so cute. And he had a twinkle in his eye from the day he was born. And he loved a good joke. And he was quick. He was smart and quick and would do really cute things. And he was my buddy. And I can remember kind of capitalizing over him. I commandeered him whenever I could from the rest of the family. And he was still a baby, and I had taken him upstairs to my bedroom, and I put him on my twin bed, and I was changing clothes, probably for chores. And that little stinker rolled off the bed. And the bed was high.
Oh, dear.
And of course he cried, and it was a hurt cry. There's a difference from crying and a hurt cry.
Yeah.
And the family recognized that and came charging up to hear what I had done to my baby brother. Reed still used to tease me because I felt so badly. This is my little baby brother that I dearly loved. He felt I wasn't paying attention. He fell off. Oh, I got chewed out. And he used to say he was the way he was because I let him fall on his head. So Reed was only 4 when Daddy was killed, and 8 when we moved up to Peowa. And given that they were living on the ranch up there, Dallas had need for him too. And Reed and Rolf had chores to do before and after school and it all. And as soon as Reed was of age, he got his steer too. And I helped him buy his steer. And that was fun. And also, he had a friend whose name was Louis Roundy, I think was his name. Anyway, Jan got a kick out of Reed too. And when Jan came to town, which was more often in the summertime because there were rodeos in Utah that Jan would go to. So we would drive up to Peowa any number of times to pick up Reed and Louie, his friend, and take him to the rodeos with us. And Jan would take him behind the chutes, which was big time, for those little farts to go behind the chutes and to watch what was going on. They would spend 3/4 of the rodeo there, certainly during the horse events. And when the bulls came out, though, they would come and sit with me. Interesting side note on that is that Louis Fields became a rodeo cowboy, and not only a rodeo cowboy, but the world's champion bareback rider and saddle bronc rider.
Whoa.
So that was the effect that Jan had on them. And Louis' son also became world champion. too. So and I think it's now in the third generation, but I've lost track in how the third generation is doing. But Reed did well in school. As I mentioned, he was quick, he was smart, and he would figure out things the smart way and not the hard way. And Dallas was always on his butt because he was late doing things, or he wasn't doing the way things should be done. They lost the milk tank several times because he wasn't watching what should have been done, and the milk was constantly being tested, and to dump those gallons, hundreds of gallons of milk, was terrible, and financial loss. Absolutely. And you can bet that he got his butt kicked by Dallas. Oh, Dallas feels kind of badly that he maybe was too rough on the boys, but poor Dallas, he had such a huge responsibility, bless his heart. And he still is such a kind, sweet man. And but he does have a streak of orneriness about him still, but that has to be the German gene. Reed used to, it really showed up, especially in high school, his sneaky ways, and he died 3 weeks after Rolf did. And to this day, we have no idea why Reed left. Wow. And it devastated the whole family, especially being so soon after Rolf's death. Right. And we understood Rolf to some degree, though it wasn't expected. Rolf was in a rehabilitation center when he died and under doctor's care, and there was no evidence of him leaving, and certainly not with Reed. And anyway, at his funeral, one of his friends was asked to be a speaker, and also happened to be Reed's age and went through school with Reed, and they stayed friends all these years. And this friend told some stories of Reed that were really funny, but also showed what Reed did. One of the things that Reed did was he took up smoking in high school, and the family didn't know or didn't recognize that Reed was a smoker. Well, he also started chewing tobacco. If you can imagine, such a dirty habit. Anyway, he would sit in the back of the room, of the schoolroom, classroom, and open one of the windows. And when the teacher wasn't watching, he'd spit out this awful tobacco. No one ever caught on what he was up to. Oh my. Ever. He also wrestled, and Reed did quite well in his wrestling. It seems like he won some honors with it, and he loved it, and it was a good outlet for Reed. He could get on his mat and do that, and he also played basketball, and I think Reed played football too. And he was always into something, and he was good with mechanics. Enjoyed that part of it. And in high school, he learned to weld, and he became a master at it, and he made some really very interesting artistic things with his welding, besides welding these pipe fences and heaven knows what else. He did some big jobs with them. And anyway, Reed married a gal. She was still going to school, and he just graduated. And my sense of Reed marrying Cindy was that Mama at that point decided she had enough of the ranch. Reed had graduated. It was time now for her to live her life. So she put the ranch up for sale, which sold immediately. And the story goes that they feel she maybe have sold it for a little too less in her anxiousness to move to Salt Lake City. But she left Reed alone. And before Reed knew it, he was out of the family home and into Dallas's little house that was next on the property, that was also on the ranching property. And the new owner of the Piowa Ranch recognized that Reed knew the ranch really well and hired him to take care of the ranch. Heaven's sake, Reed was only 18 years old.
Oh.
But Mr. Alder, Jack Alder, was the new owner's ranch, really liked Reed and took a fatherly stance with Reed. And he let Reed get away with murder, actually. And he married Cindy, and Cindy was only a junior in high school.
Wow.
And she was way too young. And unfortunately, she had been molested by her stepfather and so had serious issues. And of course, Reed didn't know how in the world to handle those.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a very unhappy marriage. And Reed's temper really showed up because of the craziness that Cindy was going through. And Mama sort of washed her hands of Reed to a degree. And so Reed, in a way, felt abandoned. I'm sorry, family, that's my take of it, but I think I'm pretty accurate there. Anyway, Reed finally divorced Cindy, but he stayed with Cindy as long as he possibly could stand it. And it got a little bit violent, as I understand, and it frightened Reed. He knew that he needed to get out of there, or else it could get even uglier. But he stayed with them because he loved his 3 kids, and it really hurt him to leave. And he took jobs around Salt Lake so he could be with his kids. And but then he married, after a few years, a gal whose name was Kathryn, but she liked Cat. And so they called her Cat. And she was a tough one, tough around the gills. And she loved horses. And Reed did everything he could to meet his obligations with Cindy and the kids, and keep her in horses and horse shows, and that's even more expensive than livestock.
Yeah, sure.
And she even got into racing, and I only met her once, and said, "Oh, Reed," in my mind, what were you thinking? Anyway, they got divorced too, and he had his eye on a gal by the name of Kathy McAllister, I think was her name, when he was separated from Cindy, not divorced, but separated. And Kathy was in the process of getting a divorce, I believe. And they really loved each other. But Reed, for some reason, just couldn't hang around. He needed to, at that point in his life, he needed to go find himself. His mom kind of abandoned him. The marriage with Cindy was a total disaster and was about as ugly as it can get. And he was being called all kinds of names. And he got a job welding, I believe, in Wyoming, and that's where he met this cat and got married. And anyway, when Reed got into some legal trouble, and what that was about was Reed started drinking and drinking heavily. And he had gotten a number of DUIs. And he got warned, only 3 times and you're out. And he spent almost a year in prison, not in jail, but in prison, because he wrecked a truck and he landed in prison. And bless his heart, he decided, I don't like this rough life, this isn't a good life. And so he took all kinds of classes, and one of them was apparently how to deal with your anger. And one of the things is to write letters to people that you know that you did wrong by. And I got one of those letters, and unfortunately, I took Cindy's side to the marriage, but not intentionally. I tried to get the two of them together, and Reed wouldn't have any part of it, and actually Cindy wouldn't either. I'd invite them to dinner and try to say, well, let's at least just talk this out, but no, Cindy wanted to make Reed wrong. She wanted blood, and Reed ended up the same. He wanted blood from her too, and there was just no bringing them together. And so then Reed disappeared, and Cindy still came down to me and would talk and try to help her. And Reed got to thinking that I liked her better than him, and felt that I took her side when I really didn't. I was just trying to keep the peace, so to speak. Anyway, that was sad. I missed Reed those years. I really did. And I don't think he ever really understood how much I loved him and how much I missed that relationship. Because he used to stop by whenever he was in town and would visit and laugh and hoot and holler and it all. And he invited me up with Alder. When he was with Alder, the herdsman at the Peoa Ranch, they bought acreage on the Utah-Idaho border to winter the cattle. And so Reed would have to go up there every day to check on the cattle. And that was a good 1.5 to 2 hour drive every day and then back home again. And I wanted to see what that looked like up there. And he invited me to meet him in Snowville, which was close by this property. And Alder had put a trader house up there because, especially during calving season, Reed would stay there to keep an eye on the cows to make sure that if any of them had any trouble calving, that Reed would be able to take care of the cow. And he was proficient at it. He invited me up there. I met him in Snowville. And in these days now, we had ATVs, but we saddled up horses because there was a couple of cows that he knew were going to calve pretty soon. And we'd have to bring it down with a horse. And so we caught the horses and rode over and Reed over to the property where the cattle were. And Reed had a fear of snakes like Celia did of frogs. You said snake to Reed and he would shiver and shake, literally. And I'm kind of that way. I don't like snakes at all, but not to the degree that Reed. He was like Celia. He had a real phobia of snakes. And there was literally a pit of rattlesnakes on this property. And he was telling me about it, that you had to be careful when you were there and with the horses and cattle. And the cattle never grazed very close to that pit. And I wanted to see it. So Reed pointed it to it, but he would not get anywhere near. I'll bet he was a half a mile off. And I rode up close enough to see, and the horse was snorting and not liking where we were. And so, in fact, when I turned the horse around, the horse couldn't wait. He started galloping as soon as I turned around. Bless the horse. And this was, in fairness, too, I was using some judgment. It was cold, and so the snakes weren't moving very much, and certainly not up through that pit that they were.
Right.
And it was a rocky pit. It was a perfect place for those rattlesnakes. Anyway, we found the cattle, of course, and rode through them to see if anyone was in trouble. And yes, there was one cow particularly that was trying to have her calf and having trouble. And so Reed and I took it to the corrals that were by this trailer house, and Reed pulled the calf, and but the cow, they call it eclampsia, I think. It's where where her innards started coming out. And golly, I was amazed to watch Reed. He was just like a veterinarian. He reached in way up to his shoulder and pushed everything back into place. And I would cut the surgical string to spring her back up, because we had to cut her to help get the calf out, because the calf was coming feet first, and that was why the cow was having a problem. It was a breech birth, and with those hind feet and rear end trying to come out, those are hard births, and lots of times the calves don't survive. And fortunately, this little calf did, and it was a good mother. She had calves before and knew how to take care of them, which is amazing to watch. They literally eat the afterbirth, and they're not
carnivores.
Carnivores at all.
Yeah.
And so to watch them get that afterbirth off the calf, and then they lick the calf dry. It's amazing to watch. And then they go find that afterbirth and start munching on it. And usually they nudge that little calf up as soon as they can, because it's critical that that calf drink immediately to get that colostrum. And if a calf doesn't get that colostrum, which is so much of their mother's antibiotics and antibodies and all of that kind of thing, they do really poorly if they don't get that, if they even live. So a mother knows that, the cow knows that. And so this was a good cow, good mom, good cow. She was a good cow with her calf. So I helped Reed with that. And then we went into this trailer, and it was definitely a man's cave. And he pulled out a can of mushroom soup, and we heated it up for lunch, and had a box of crackers and hunk of cheese, and that was lunch. And one thing I want to mention about Reed too was that he always had a dog, and he loved those dogs, and those dogs loved Reed, even though he was a terrible tease with them. The dogs knew it, and they would play with him like that. And I forget, I think he called it Mac. It was a Australian Shepherd which makes fabulous cow dogs. Well, Mac would get on top of the cattle truck, mind you, which is high up, and sit on the hood or go up on top of the cab. And we're going down the freeway 70 miles an hour with the dog in front or on the cab. And people would go driving by us, honking, going, and we'd go, I know. You know? And how that dog never blew off. I mean, I was petrified the whole drive up and the drive down to Snowville where my car was. I mean, I was petrified that whole time. No, to Ogden. That I left my car at the Flying J that whole time, and he went all the way to Peoa with that dog. That was his place. Comes summer, come winter, even winter, he would sit up there to this day. And all of his dogs did that, but I didn't know that. I just knew it because I never had the opportunity to go with Reed. Usually if I did, it was at the ranch. And I remember one time at the ranch, we decided we would go down the Weber River. Again, my brain is going, it was a blow-up boat. There was another name for it, but we would decide we'd go down the river because the river went through the Schumann Ranch and a long ways, and we could go all the way to the Rockport Reservoir. And the time to do this would be in the spring because it would be this winter runoff, the snow runoff. And the river was pretty wild and definitely was overflowing its banks and it all. And the only time to really do that and have a wild time would be in the spring. And it seems to me that the twins, or at least one of them, was with us. And we started way up on the Schumann property where the river started, and we put the boat in. We had a grand time coming down. We really did. It was fun. There were places in the river where it got quite deep and the river ran slower, or we would go over where it wasn't so deep and it was like rapids. And where the river would turn, it would be usually a little slower if you got at the farmost turn. And that's also where the river would have washed out a lot of the bank. And so at one of those places, we stopped and had lunch. We could grab a place and have lunch. And of course, we were all soaking wet because you just can't get in the boat and not get wet. And if you tried to stay dry, of course, everyone had to douse you. Mm-hmm. And so we kept coming down and we got into some rapids, and somehow Reed and I got tipped over. I think all of us got tipped over, actually. I can't remember exactly. But I remember I bounced up quick enough, but we couldn't find Reed. He was under the boat. Ooh. Oh, we were frightened. Oh, we were so scared. And we were the water was moving fast, and none of us really dared to get back in there because we were lucky to get our butts out. And after a little bit, way too long, Reed comes up sputtering and was mad at us that we didn't come to get him. But what happened was he was under the boat, and the boat's bottom was not solid. It was just that rubberized fabric kind of thing. And so when the rest of us got in, it kind of cornered him, or, because his head was there, and none of us recognized that. Well, it wasn't his time to go, that's for sure. Boy, we were all really frightened. We were really frightened. And we made it down to the reservoir. That was fun. And we paddled around just a little bit there. And I can't read. Somebody came and got us. It was before cell phone days. So we had to get down there at a certain time so our ride could load us up and get us back to the ranch. But that was fun. And I would bring Reed down too and stay with me at the apartment over the weekends. I would take him to a show or to something that I thought he would enjoy. And we had a special relationship. We really did. And I was just so sorry I missed him during those days of between Cindy and Kathy, the gal that he found while he was separated from Cindy. They got together again. He had written her a letter while he was in the Huskow Slammer too, and told her that he had to leave. He had to go find himself, and that he really loved her and hoped that she would find forgiveness in her heart, because he had told her he would let her. He apparently had told Kathy that he needed to get out. He needed to get away because there is so much. Cindy she was raised in that county, and her family, the Wilds, were generations in that county. In fact, some of them had even been settlers in that county. And Cindy worked for the bank, and she let everyone know that Reed was an asshole. And Reed had been a commissioner of the county there, and he had some friends that knew who he was and forgave him, and certainly understood the difficulty he was having. But Cindy had the populace against Reed because she would tell people how awful he was to her. And he was slammer around a little bit. He agreed that, but his anger got the best of him, and she provoked it too, because she didn't know when to back down and wouldn't back down. And so that was an unhappy thing. But he had written Kathy a letter, and he told her where he was and what had happened in the interim of, I think Kathy said there was like 4 years difference. And then he got out of prison, but it was about 6 months before he dared call her. And actually, I think he wrote her a letter first, asking if it would be safe and all right for him to visit with her, and that he would call. He would give her some time to think about it. I think actually for him to get enough gumption to call her, because he had promised her he'd let her know when he'd leave town, and he didn't, and it devastated her. Anyway, Kathy apparently gave it a lot of thought, like, do I really want to get tied up with this renegade again? But she finally decided she would, to see him and for old times, and she still had a place in her heart for him. She understood Reed, and Reed could be Reed. He didn't have to be anything more than who he was. Mm-hmm. Who he was plenty enough for her. Mm-hmm. And so she decided she'd give it another go. And they got married, and they were married only 4 years. And they were very happy. They were so much in love, and it was wonderful to see. Reed was having some health problems. He had broken his back with an ATV running over him, and he had broken it several times actually, and he was healing from that actually when wasn't healing. he needed an operation actually, and he didn't have enough money or insurance to have that done. So he was suffering with that, and he was doing heavy equipment work to stay alive, and had divorced Kat a year or two before. Well, certainly he wasn't married to her, I don't think, during the prison stay. And Kat, I'll meet with you. And Kathy was telling me just the other day that as she drove up, they were going to meet at a restaurant, and he parked so that he could see her walk in. And she walked in and she waited. She waited. And then finally he comes strolling in. And come to find out, he was trying to get up his nerve to go see her. And it was again love at first sight. And they got married shortly after. And bless her heart, Kathy has a big mucky muck at the University Hospital. And in fact, she trains everybody, including doctors, on procedures and equipment. And it's a big job. Nurses in terms of protocol and things, because when they get out of school, they really don't know how to run a ward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so she teaches them to
That's
do
great.
that. And she was sleeping one night and she woke up all of a sudden and knew something was wrong with Reed, and reached over immediately, could tell he wasn't breathing, being a nurse. And she tried to do CPR and could tell that she wasn't bringing him back, and trying to keep a CPR and calling emergency. Yeah. And they came, but Reed was gone. He was not allowed to come back. And it devastated Kathy. It's been 2 years now since Reed, and she's just beginning to think of life after him. Mm-hmm. And she's on a diet now and trying to make herself look a little cuter. But her heart is still broken. She says there's never going to be another Reed. And I think all of us feel that way.
Yeah.
It was amazing at his funeral. I was a little late getting to the viewing, and there were people lined up outside of the chapel, 4 deep. And I thought, wow, I wonder what's going on here, along with Reed's funeral. And I got out. Christian was with me. I got out and walked around this long line into the chapel, and there was the same long line that went to the room where they were having the viewing. These people were there for Reed, and they had to open the overflow for Reed. Even though he was a scoundrel, people adored him. And he did good things, too, for the county while he was a commissioner. Mm-hmm. He was an environmentalist, and there were the population of Salt Lake City was outgrowing the city space, and people were envisioning themselves as gentlemen farmers. And it was cold up there in the wintertime, but beautiful in the summertime, especially with that river coming through. And Reed tried to preserve that as much as he could, the natural habitat and it all. Unfortunately, Mr. Alder has since died, but his family are maintaining the green space, which is wonderful. We're happy about that. Well, Dallas had the ranch up there. He only took 40 acres of the natural meadow and turned it into alfalfa. And that was only because he needed the hay.
Mhm.
And it's still that way, which is nice. It's a beautiful, pristine, magical place. It really is. And it was so lovely to see how many people were there to honor Reed. I'm sure Reed was a bit surprised. It was funny. Kathy invited one of his best friends who had been through school and high school with him and knew all of the antics that Reed was up to and still did. They still did things together. This guy was rough around the edges, and here we are in the Mormon chapel. He didn't let anything stand in his way and describing things. I mean, you heard here gasps all around you. I'm sure that Reed was hooting and hollering, saying, "Go for it, man, keep on." And it was funny. I wish I could remember this guy's name. He draped himself over the pulpit and was wearing cowboy gear, of course. Was telling the wild stories. Never mind, we're in a house of worship. It was a wonderful tribute, and there were several speakers who honored the decorum and revered the reverence of the place. And one had been a bishop and was a neighbor and spoke very kindly of Reed and of what a great neighbor he was and great friend and all the nice things that Reed did that were not expected or asked for. And everyone that came spoke of Reed's kindness and generosity and big heart that he had.
Yeah.
I miss him still. I just wish I had that time that he, just before he died, he said he forgave me.
That's sweet.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to seeing him actually, and
On the other side.
To be with him. Yeah, and be buddies again like we were.
That's right.
And I'm sure that Jan and he are together having riotous time.
Absolutely. Well, we'll take a pause here and then we'll come back and maybe we'll talk about Jan.
Oh, goodness. Okay. How do you talk about Jan?
Right?
Wow.